Welcome to the session, How to Read a VPAT, parentheses ACR. If you're joining us online, please place your questions in the Q&A panel rather than the chat panel, as chat will not be moderated. For attendees here in the room, please hold your questions until the end of the session. We'll try to get as many as possible in the time. If we don't get to them, some presenters will join the chat and try to answer questions individually. We're very happy to have Gian Wild, owner, founder, and CEO of Accessibility Oz with us today to talk about the layout of a voluntary product accessibility template, also known as a VPAT, and how to properly interpret the associated accessibility conformance report, also known as an ACR. Over the course of this session, we will learn about red flags, what to do about them, get examples of what a good VPAT looks like, and learn how you can confirm whether the VPAT is actually correct. Please help me in welcoming Gian.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming today. Please mention in the Q&A if you can't hear me or if I'm going too fast. I do have a very strong Australian accent. I hope you can follow along. So yes, today I'm going to be talking about how to read a VPAT/ACR, ACR standing for Accessibility Conformance Report. And sorry, I'm just going to cough. So this is our team, BC. I like to call it BC, before COVID. This is 2018. This is about 2/3 of our team. We all got together at CSUN. And what I wanted to do when I created Accessibility Oz is I wanted to provide, not just create accessible experiences for people, but also provide employment opportunities for people with disabilities. And you can look at us, we all look quote unquote normal. And basically, I've never had less than 60% of my staff have some kind of disability that affects their daily life. So in the 14 years that I have been operating Accessibility Oz, we've had staff with dyslexia, moderate vision impairment, epilepsy, migraines, severe vision impairment, physical impairment, post-traumatic stress disorder, Crohn's disease, multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy, and long COVID. I myself suffer from long COVID. I caught it at CSUN in 2023. So I'm currently kind of struggling with that. So one thing to remember if you're new to accessibility is that it's not just about vision impairments. A lot of people think only about screen reader accessibility. Screen reader is a tool that someone who is blind uses to interpret a web page and read it aloud to them. And people who are new to accessibility seem to focus on screen reader accessibility and that's something that is absolutely, essential, but only to a small group of people. The largest group of people who actually use the web are people with cognitive disabilities. And when I say cognitive disabilities, I don't necessarily mean an intellectual disability, although that is included, but also reading difficulties, dyslexia, ADHD, etc., etc. So a little bit about me, why you should listen to me. I started working in accessibility in 1998. I like to joke that I started when I was 4 years old, but that was not the case. I worked on the first accessible website in Australia, created Australia's first automated accessibility testing tool, was the invited expert to the W3C WCAG 2 working group, working on WCAG 2. I worked on the 2006 Commonwealth Games and every Commonwealth Games since then. And then I spent 5 years managing usability and accessibility services at Monash University. So I know what it's like to work at a tertiary institution. It is quite difficult. You have lots and lots of projects and really big projects and teeny tiny budgets, if you have budgets at all. So I definitely feel your pain. I left in 2011 and I founded Accessibility Oz, released AusPlayer, our accessible video player, and then AusArt, our automated accessibility testing tool. I spoke at the United Nations on the importance of web accessibility in 2015. In 2018, I became the chair of the Mobile Accessibility Testing Guidelines, and in 2020, I was inducted into the Australia's Hall of Fame as Accessibility Person of the Year. So that's why you should listen to me. Just bear with me. I'm going to turn the aircon up a bit. It's pretty hot here in Australia at the moment. Okay, so what is the difference between a VPAT and an ACR? Well, a VPAT is a voluntary product accessibility template, and an ACR is an accessibility conformance report. Basically, the VPAT is the template that you use to create an ACR. So when you actually ask people for a VPAT, and that is the common way of asking for it, you're actually asking for an ACR because you're not asking for the template that people fill out. You are asking for the filled out, completed version of the template, which is then called an ACR. So, what is an ACR? And I will use the terms interchangeably in this conversation because I also, have grown up on using the term VPAT when, the technical version is ACR. An ACR is an explanation of the accessibility compliance of a product. It's owned and often assessed by the product vendor, but it's much better if it is assessed by a third party. It's required by Section 508 and almost all federal solicitations, but you can ask for it whether you require it or not. And a lot of universities, colleges do ask for it. What it is not is it's not an accessibility audit report of a product. It's not only for government. It's not only for web products. It's not always accurate. In fact, it's very commonly inaccurate. And it's not a good indicator of what we call ATAG compliance. ATAG is the authoring tool accessibility guidelines. So it's basically stuff around, say, Canvas and whether it can output code or output web pages that are fully accessible. That's basically ATAG compliance, and the ACR VPAT doesn't cover that. There are a number of different ACR categories. The most common is web products, so basically websites or, web applications, operating systems, desktop software, photocopiers, telephones, tablets, and smartphones. So you probably won't see the more hardware type ACRs, but they do exist. So there are sections of an ACR. The first part is the title, which should include the company name and the words Accessibility Conformance Report. You need to have the name of the product and version, a description of the product, and what we've been seeing a lot in VPATs recently is the description is a very salesy version, like, Acme is the best note-taking software in the world and will support your students in doing blah, blah, blah. And that's not helpful at all. You need just a description of the product, not, a sales pitch. The report date is also important contact information. So we often require that contact information has a specific person named, not just accessibility@acme.com, and a phone number. Notes, so, notes are where you can put, say, any exceptions, the evaluation methods used, and that's really important because a lot of people talk about, as I said before, screen reader accessibility, but they don't talk about anything else. So they're like, hey, we tested this product using JAWS. And it's like, yep, that's not sufficient in terms of evaluation methods, but I will talk about that a bit later. Then you've got the report information, which is provided in tables and terms. There are tables for each WCAG standard or level. So, there's table 1 for level A, table 2 for level AA, and most people don't attempt AAA, so there is no AAA table. And you can also specify, VPAT, sorry, that are against WCAG 2 or 2.1 or 2.2. And certainly if you're seeing VPATs that are testing only against WCAG 2, then, that's a pretty good indication that, it's not very accurate, because WCAG 2.1 was released in 2018, which was, 6 years ago. So it's really important that the VPATs are up to date. And then there are additional sections for, say, Section 508 requirements, but there's also, an international version. So if you've got, say, a product that might be available, in the UK, there might be a section on what's called EN 301549, which is basically the accessibility requirements for the for Europe, not for the UK. I forgot about how the UK was not part of Europe, and they are very similar to WCAG 2 when it comes to web. So, how do you tell if an ACR is reasonable in 10 minutes or less? So the first thing is look for red flags, and you don't need to have a lot of accessibility knowledge to actually, identify red flags at ACRs. Absolutely, you might need accessibility knowledge to identify how to fix those issues, but that's not your job as someone who is reviewing a VPAT. You are not there to say, hey, this is how we want it fixed. You're there to say, hey, this is not working. So the first thing is, does it have an inaccurate or unclear, or what I just saw yesterday, a missing description of the product? That's not a good thing. Does the note section explicitly say that the VPAT does not cover its essential features? So we actually saw a VPAT for a video player, and in the notes section, it said all video player features were not included. And it was like, well, what is the VPAT about there if you don't include that information? Anything not dated is a real problem, or anything dated over 12 months. Now, you can be a bit lax with that 12 months. Certainly, when COVID hit, there was a lot of, we were seeing a lot of VPATs, up until like even 2022 that were created in 2019 as COVID kind of messed up everybody's plans. But that's really shouldn't be the case now. You really want to see something, released in the last 12 months. And if it's not released in the last 12 months, ask the vendor whether they have actually changed their product in the last 12 months or since the VPAT was released. And if they say yes, then you have a very good reason to say, well, your VPAT is not indicative of the accessibility compliance of the product, because you've made changes to the product and you haven't reflected them in the VPAT. So you also need to really make sure, of course, if the dates work, that they are using the latest version of the VPAT, which is version 2.5 November 2023. Once again, of course, if VPAT is dated before November 2023, it won't be able to use version 2.5, but you really want to make sure that it's at least using version 2.4. The other thing to look for is the evaluation methods used, and to ensure that the testing undertaken is detailed. So make sure that they mention manual testing as well as automated testing, because you really can't test a product without both those things. And you also want them to include, what the names of the automated tools that they used, and, the assistive technologies that they tested with. It's not absolutely necessary to test with assistive technologies under WCAG 2, but it is a very good idea, especially for someone who is releasing a VPAT, to test using those products. Now, I see a lot of products saying, hey, we've tested on JAWS. And then I say, hey, what about NVDA and VoiceOver? And then I also say, what about mobile? Now, if you have a product that is never going to be used on a mobile device, that's going to be a very strange product. So you really want to make sure the VPAT includes mobile testing as well as mobile assistive technology testing, which means VoiceOver on iOS and TalkBack on Android when you're talking about screen readers, but also things like voice control, which allows users to move around a website or something using their voice, magnifiers, and zoom and different color combinations. So that those kind of things should be included as well. And if you are interested in mobile accessibility testing, I will put some information into the Q&A about where you can find some additional information about mobile accessibility. So other red flags, as I said, automated testing only in the evaluation method, major red flag. As I said, mention only of screen readers and no mention of mobile and mobile assistive technology testing. Look, that's me. I got ahead of myself. And then other red flags are things like missing or inaccurate contact information, not evaluated in any of level A or double A. That's a real red flag. And one VPAT for multiple products is also a problem. And I've seen that recently as well. And then cells without content. So, you've got a section where you say, these are the remarks and explanations as to how we met a particular requirement. And if those are empty, then that's a problem. And we do see that a lot. But, even if you pass a particular VPAT, we want to know how you did that, right? And so that's why that information needs to have content. And then using terminology like passes or fails is incorrect. The correct terminology is supports, partially supports, does not support, and not applicable. And if you see a lot of not applicables, that's a real red flag as well. And also, if you see all supports, that's a real red flag as well. I've gone through hundreds of VPATs, and the ones that were the most inaccurate were the ones that said all supports. And it's not a terrible thing to say, hey, we have this problem in the VPAT, and, this is how we're going to fix it. This is when it's going to be fixed. That shows that you're being honest. So if you see a VPAT that doesn't, it has all supports, then unless that is a product made by an accessibility company, then I would be questioning that. So, what does a good ACR look like? It has explanations for each criteria. It uses conventional wording such as supports, partially supports, does not support, not applicable. It stands up to questioning. And so if it's important that if someone sends you a VPAT or you get a VPAT off the web, that you're able to actually contact that company and ask them questions, and that company actually responds to these questions. It really needs to be written by someone other than the product vendor. Now, there are some exceptions to this, like Microsoft, for example, they write all their VPATs in-house, and that's because they have, really large accessibility teams that work separate to the testing teams, work separate to the development teams. But if you're a smaller company, you're not going to have a team of 10 or 15 accessibility specialists. And accessibility is really a niche industry. And that's why it's really important that someone with accessibility knowledge, writes the VPAT. So having a VPAT written by the product vendor is definitely a bit of a red flag. So making sure it's written by someone else is important. It needs to have a clear description of the product and refer to existing accessibility testing tools in the testing undertaken. So how do you assess the accuracy of an ACR? So it's all very easy to fill out an ACR and say, hey, yeah, we meet everything. How do you make sure that they're actually telling the truth? First, read through the ACR. Does the ACR contain reference to non-accessibility issues within the product? If you don't know the product, Google it. So name the product and accessibility and have a look and see if those issues are reflected in the VPAT. Read through the description. Does it accurately describe the product and its essential features? Read through the evaluation methods. Do they sound reasonable? Are there not applicables for features the product definitely has? And if there are exceptions, are they reasonable, or do these exceptions block actual access to essential functionality? Now, second, you can do some testing, and you don't need to be an accessibility specialist to do this testing. The first testing is to test with a keyboard. So basically start in the address bar of you're talking about a web product, and you press and basically press tab, and that will move from actionable item to actionable item. Shift tab moves you back, and if you want to activate an item, use the space key or the enter key. And you might also, if you have like drop down menus, navigate using the arrow keys. So basically, can you use your product using only the keyboard? And then the other one is the pause, stop, hide requirement. So is there movement on the site? If there is, does it have an accessible pause feature, which means that it's accessible via the mouse, keyboard, or touch? Or does it stop within 5 seconds? And is that included in the pause, stop, hide section? And I should have mentioned with the keyboard, any keyboard issues, are they mentioned in the keyboard section? 2.4.1, bypass blocks. Does every page have a skip link? And is it the first focusable link on the page? If not, is this included in the ACR? Now, a skip link is basically, I'm just going to show you. So this is the Accessibility Oz website. So if we go, see this up here, we've got skip to content. It's the very first link. Second link is login. First link is skip to the content. Now, this may appear with our site, it's always there. It may appear when you tab to it and then disappear when you tab off it, but that's a pretty easy test to do. And then error identification. So submit an empty or incorrect form, and are the errors described appropriately, and do they have suggestions? So, and is that included in the ACR? So there are 2 requirements here, error description and error suggestion. And so that means if you have, say, a first name field and it's empty, then the error should say, please enter content into the first name or something along those lines. For example, John. And, for the surname, it will say, please enter content into the surname field, for example, Smith. And it's important to do that because we talk about surnames here in Australia, but I believe in the US, you call them family names or last names. So that kind of suggestion can be helpful to a lot of people, and it's really easy to test. Another thing that you can do is conduct a high-level accessibility audit or hire someone to do it. We have done a number of these things, and it shouldn't fall to people purchasing the product to actually do accessibility audits and pay for them. But we have, been involved in that a number of times. And that way you can find all the accessibility issues and you can pass them over to the vendor and say, hey, what are you doing about this? Another thing you can do is user testing with people with disabilities using assistive technologies. So you can, say, give it to someone who works for you, who's, say, reliant only on the keyboard or a screen reader or Zoom or whatever, and say, hey, can you use this product? But please remember that these people, have jobs like everybody else. They have very specific expert skill that you are taking advantage of. And so, they should be treated with respect and remunerated where possible. And then reach out to the vendor. So what if there are red flags? Question. Send those questions to the vendor or have a meeting with them. Why is this dated 14 months ago? Has the product not been updated in 14 months? Why did you say this section is not applicable when clearly the product has this feature? What kind of testing did you do to ensure compliance? Why did you decide to fill out this ACR internally? Why does the description omit essential features of the product? Why did you decide to test with only one screen reader? There are a lot of partially supports. Do you have a timeline as to when these issues will be fixed? So question. And, sometimes they take a little time to respond. We did some work with college where we sent questions to the vendor. The project ran about 6 months, and about 3 months after we finished the project, we got responses from the vendor. So, that's a pretty good indication that perhaps you don't want to purchase that product because, you don't get a lot of support. And it's always easier to question VPATs before, contracts have been signed and money changes hands. But that's not always the case. And sometimes you do need to purchase a product that does not meet accessibility requirements. And so what do you do then? So develop a timeline. So, make sure they can actually say, we're going to have these issues. We know you have these issues. When are you actually going to fix them? And then follow up with them. And then update the contract. So if they're like, well, we're going to fix this in year two, and you re-sign the contract after year one, make sure that information is in the contract. And then lastly, develop what's called an equally effective alternate access plan. Now, this is used, mostly from universities and tertiary institutions, but it's absolutely, something that you can use anywhere. And basically, it's like, how are you going to provide, assistance or an alternate means of, using the functionality if the product cannot be used by someone with a disability? And now, questions.
Awesome, Gian. Thank you so much. Let me see if we have any to start with on Zoom. Okay, there's a long one that I'm going to go ahead and read out.
Mhm.
Uh, okay, let me try and get.
Just while you're sorting that out, I just want to show everyone, this is the Accessibility Oz webpage. Well, that's the website. And if you go to here and go to articles, you get this page, and there is a section called VPATs. And so there's an article that basically covers what I've said here. And there's also a bunch of webinars here. So you can have a look at the history of web accessibility, how to test your accessibility of mobile websites and apps in under 2 hours, that kind of stuff. And if you're looking for mobile information, it's here, mobile testing, because we're not using Q&A, so there's nothing for me to put in there. So I just wanted to tell people that's where they can find things.
Awesome. And I have the question pulled up now. So, with every purchaser having to test each product they purchase, that's an awful lot of duplication of effort. Most countries have specific regulations, certifications, etc., for things like, say, car safety. Auto manufacturers don't rate the safety of their own cars, then expect every individual buyer to verify whether they told the truth or no, or not. Instead, there's some entity or government body that certifies the safety of the car. Will we ever move toward a more regulatory, reliable, national or international certification of accessibility of IT products?
Excellent question. So there's a couple of responses to that. Firstly, when it comes to reviewing of VPATs, the Access Board has been looking at developing a kind of list of, hey, we've reviewed this VPAT and we're sharing it with people. So that's something to look out for. But that's also something that you should Google, where it's specifically around VPATs. But the other thing that you should keep an eye out is something called standard accessibility reporting. And this is something that has been put together by Chris Law, who created the ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium Conference and the Digital Accessibility Law Conference. And basically, standard accessibility reporting does do exactly what you are talking about. And so it's in its, infancy, and it's something that you might that should happen in the next few years or so, hopefully. But basically, it's about standards to rate the accessibility of everyday products. So, this is something that we're hopefully moving towards, but, it's a bit of a slow process.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering that. Are there any questions from anyone in the room? Any other questions on? Oh, I have one other one. What's the time there and how's the weather?
Well, it is currently 8:30 in the morning, and it is 28 degrees, which is probably close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's very humid.
Hmm.
So it gets quite, we're in the middle of a heat wave because we're in spring at the moment, but yeah, it's really feeling a bit like summer.
Oh my goodness. Here I am marveling how cool it is here in Arizona today.
Yeah, well, we have staff all over the world, and so and very often our temperatures are the opposite. So we'll be like here in short sleeves, and we'll have staff that rugged up in scarves and things. So yes, it's but I live up in Queensland, which is north, and it's quite warm here most of the time. It's a very hot state.
Got it. Well, there was also a comment that next time there's a conference like this and you're able to come in person, we'd love to have you present.
Yes, I thank you. I would love to be able to travel, but with my long COVID, it's not something that I think will happen soon. But hopefully I will recover and hopefully I will be able to travel again.
That is very understandable. Well, seeing no other questions in person or over Zoom, we thank you very much, Gian, for being here and presenting with us. Or presenting to us anyway. This was our last session of the day in the alumni room. For those in person, you can catch the end of the optimizing the use of tools during Zoom presentations over in the Arizona ballroom if you would like as well. We really appreciate all of you joining us at the 2024 ASU Accessibility Awareness Day conference. Recordings for most sessions will be posted within a week or so on the website at aaad.asu.edu. Please share what you've learned here today with your friends and colleagues. And if you want to learn more and get involved in accessibility, we have resources for our community members. The ASU Digital Accessibility Liaisons meet monthly for ongoing accessibility training that's open to everyone. Or you can join the Universal Design and Accessible Technology Group. Information on both of those groups is on the ASU Accessibility website at accessibility.asu.edu. If you get a chance, please go to the schedule page on the conference website and use the QR code to find our conference survey. We appreciate any feedback on how to make this event better. Lastly, we'd like to say a sincere thank you to all of our volunteers and our sponsors, and also to all of our presenters. Without them, this conference wouldn't be possible. Thank you again, everybody, and we hope you enjoyed this year's ASU Accessibility Awareness Day. Yay!